It's clear when you read all four of the Gospels, the cross shaped Jesus' life. And so it should do the same for us. God's shout to humanity is the cross. Accept it or reject it, but you can't ignore it. Some of the skeptics, as we get into it, they think that the cross of Calvary and how Jesus died was a plan that went awry, and that Jesus died a death on the cross of Calvary because things went wrong. But as you read the Old Testament, you realize nothing went wrong. It was God's intention. And so from 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. when he was crucified, step by step, I want to walk through some of the things he went through. And hopefully, the Holy Spirit will just bring into your presence and mind that what Jesus was stepping into was for you and for me. The first thing that happened to him, he was scourged or whipped. Although it was unwarranted and unnecessary, Pilate had Jesus whipped to humiliate him, probably to appease the Jewish officials, and Jesus was whipped by a Roman lictor. And he used a thing called the flagellum. It had a piece of wood that was usually 14 to 18 inches long, and then it would put leather strips. It would braid the leather strips, and then it would come out. In the leather strips, they would put metal or glass or rocks. Anything that was sharp and hooked was put on those pieces of leather, so that when it would come down and whisk through the air, and when they would pull it back, it would rip skin and pieces of that person's body. He would probably quiver, and invariably they would pass out because of the pain, and blood would probably seep from the nose and the mouth and the ears, and he no doubt shook from the shock. His teeth probably rattled. With us in mind, it was for you and for me that each one of those stripes were there. Those stripes were deep. They were cutting. They were unbelievably painful. So that there is no wound or pain or disease that is so deep that his wounds could not heal. You see, faith healers make it mystical. New Age make it magic. Jesus made it real. Because we were healed, because we were bought with a price. Second, he was scorned. They realized what he said was that he was king of the Jews. So if they had a king, they mockingly were going to treat him like a king. So they did four things. They gave him a crown. First of all, crown was made because outside of their quarters, to be able to make a fire, they did not put, because of Israel, they didn't have a whole lot of big trees. They don't have forests like we have in North America. So what they would take are thorns from vines that were dried up. And the thorns are probably 2 inches long, if you've ever seen them in Israel. And they would take those and put them in a box next to the door of their barracks, so that they could just take some of those and use it as kindling wood, because they would quickly be set on fire. They were available, they were there, and it was how they made a crown for Jesus. It talks about a robe. It's the word camas. He was probably stripped down naked, and they put this short. It was not a long flowing robe. It was something that they had that was probably a piece of material, and it was done in mockery as a robe. Then they put this reed in his hand, but they actually took it and they would hit him with it. There was the procession. He had to walk from that site where Pilate tried him in Antonia's fortress. And he went through a place that is today called the Via Dolorosa. But there's nothing beautiful about it. It is a narrow marketplace where he was probably shoved and mocked, and he came within inches of everyone there, and they probably crossed the line and they took out their scorn. He would carry his cross. And whenever you would see someone with a crossbar on his shoulders, you know that there is only one thing ahead of him, and that is death. But not for Jesus. Not for this criminal, because he wasn't a criminal. Finally, he was crucified. The most terrible and cruel death that was ever devised. When someone was condemned, it would have been a situation where they were stripped naked, left exposed, and in agony. It was a square-cut iron nail held it against the spot directly behind where the so-called lifeline ends. Then he raised the hammer over the nail and brought it down with great force. 2 soldiers would grab each side of the crossbeam. As he motioned, they lifted. As they pulled up, they dragged the victim by his wrist, and the soldiers reached the upright sipes. The 4 of them would lift the crossbeam higher until the feet of the victim were completely off the ground. The body writhed with pain. The victim's arms are now in a V shape, and he became conscious of 2 unendurable circumstances: that the pain in his wrist was beyond bearing, and that the muscles cramped knotted in his forearms and his upper arm pads and his shoulder. Secondly, his pectoral muscles at the sides of his chest were momentarily paralyzed. This induced him into an involuntary panic, for he would find that while he could inhale, he would be powerless to exhale. Victims were in constant motion to keep breathing. To hang from the hands would prohibit breathing. He would rub himself up and down. A victim would not die because of loss of blood. He died of suffocation. He couldn't breathe, but he said 7 statements that were lucid, intentional, and for us. What happens at death, this proved he was dead, because the serum of the blood and the hemoglobin would separate and go into different ventricles. And so it was the red corpuscles, and the clear, what they saw was water, but it was the clear serum that actually is the base for the blood that came gushing out. And this showed one thing: the body of Jesus Christ was quite dead at that time. It's finished. It's a story of love and obedience. It is God's shout to history. The suffering of Jesus, Isaiah said, he was pierced for our transgressions. He was bruised for iniquities. The chastisement that was upon him gave us peace. He carried our sorrows, and by his stripes we are healed. He suffered in the physical so that the Spirit of God could permeate, could come in and change the physical. Because what is in the spiritual realm was carried into the physical realm by Jesus himself, so that you and I can celebrate its victory.